Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. In this video I'd like to give you guys an update on my chili plants here. So in the last video I think I was just sowing out the seeds. This one here, the Piri Piri plant, that had just started to resprout. It was very small still, hadn't really put on a lot of growth. So as you can see, I've had 100% germination success. I had put 2 seeds in each pot and both have germinated. Interestingly, the fastest one was the unknown plant that I had, and the second fastest was the germinated. But the Apache does seem to have caught up. It was quite slow going at first, but it does seem to have caught up. You can tell the ones which are F1 hybrids, which are these two here. F1 hybrids tend to be more vigorous. What it is there's two, they get a variety and they crossbreed it with a similar variety. Because they cross 2 inbred lines with each other, it becomes a hybrid plant. So it's got a lot more vigor, a lot better genes. And what tends to happen is they're all identical plants. So as you can see here, these two have grown pretty much identically the same height and size. Germinated, there is a bit of difference, but it's not massive. You know, that could be because this one just happened to germinate faster, or this was in a slightly richer compost than this one. But you can see with the mystery plant, which was self-pollinated, so it's not an F1 hybrid, that there is quite a difference with the two plants. This one's got a much darker stem. It's a lot hardier. Looking like the stem's a lot tougher. This stem's a lot looser. It's still green, a lot smaller, weaker plant. So there's quite a lot of genetic variance in this. So with this one, I'm actually just going to remove this weaker seedling because there's no point keeping the weaker plant. This plant's nice and strong, so I'll be keeping that one. These two, I will be potting them up into larger pots and separating them. I won't keep all of the plants because it's going to be too much. I had this problem last year. I had loads of chili plants. I wasn't able to keep looking after them properly because there was so many aphids. I didn't have time to check every single plant for the aphids, and so the crop wasn't so good even though I had more plants. So this year I'm hoping to have less plants but a better crop. And with the Piri Piri here, it's done really well. It's put up 2 shoots. It does need feeding. You can see it's starting to drop some of its leaves, the lower ones anyway, and they're starting to go yellow. So it's a little bit short of nitrogen, so I'll be giving that a feed soon. Most of these plants haven't been fed. It's just the nutrients left over in the compost that they've been using, and that's been plenty for now. And you can see in this, quite strong growth, just starting to branch now, so that means it's going to flower soon. Generally with chili plants, they'll just grow a straight stem with quite large leaves. Then they get to a certain height, they'll start branching because they start forming flower buds. And once that happens, they'll just keep branching from then on. The leaves will be smaller, but you'll have quite a lot of chilies coming on. And that's happened with all of these, but these are all dwarf plants, so that's why they've started so low down. The Piri Piri isn't a dwarf chili, so that's going to be a lot taller before it branches. That's why it's got such a height. Whereas these won't really grow much taller now. They'll just keep branching. They'll put on a little bit of height, but generally they'll just grow outwards a lot more, a lot wider. And these are all dwarf plants. Looking at the germinated plant, looking online, seems to be quite a messy plant, quite straggly growth, but it's low and dwarf. The Apache seems to be quite a neat one. Last year I did get a bit more height. I think these are a bit shorter than normal because I've been growing them in the grow box. I've got a variety of different grow lights, but generally there's quite a lot of LED red and blue lights, and I find that makes the growth really quite short and stubby. So that's why these are quite so short, I think. But they're all looking quite healthy. The Apache, as I say, tends to be a bit neater than the germinated looking online. I've grown these before. They have a nice kind of mini tree kind of appearance. There's a single stem and they kind of spread out. This one's a little bit different. This one, the parent it came from, grew out quite a bit taller. But I thought this was Apache. It looked kind of similar. But I'm not too sure. These two are quite nice and hot chilies. At least the parent one for this was, so it'll be interesting to see what this one's like. The germinated is a lot more mild, so it'll be interesting to see that. Piri Piri as well, very hot chili. So I'm just going to go ahead now and start planting these up, putting them into their larger pots. These will probably be the final pots they go into. The Piri Piri, I'm just going to be refreshing the compost. It's still sitting in the same compost from last year. This is a plant from last year. You can see where I cut it off and it started to resprout. So I'll just be refreshing some of the compost in this because it's been sitting there for over a year. The compost will be quite tired. So the plants have done a lot better than last year. Last year's plants, unfortunately, the roots got eaten off by scarab flies, also known as fungus gnats. That hasn't been a problem this year, so they've been really healthy. Also, the thrips have been kept at bay. I have been using some beneficial insects, and basically what they are is microscopic mites. And these mites eat the thrips before they can reproduce. They eat the thrips whilst they're young. And this has stopped the thrip population building up, so there's been no damage. They're all great healthy plants. So the compost I'm using is a similar mix to last year. It's basically mainly peat-based multi-purpose compost, so it's really rich, holds a lot of moisture and nutrients. I've also added a little bit of soil-based compost, so basically just loam. The reason for that is I find that if you have pure peat and it dries out completely, trying to get it wet again is very difficult. You put water on dry peat, it just kind of runs straight off the pot or through the pot. Whereas if you put a little bit of loam in it from a soil-based compost, it rehydrates a lot better. And I've also put some perlite in it just to keep it from getting too compacted and to give it a little bit of extra drainage, because chili plants do like it quite well drained. They don't like it as wet and as moist as a tomato plant, for example. So this just allows it to be a bit more free draining. So this is the mix I'm using. As I say, it's very similar to the one I made last year, and the plants seem to respond really well to that, even though they had a lot of pest and disease problems. So this is the unknown plant that I'm planting now. As I say, I thought it was an Apache the mother, but I wasn't too sure, so I decided to keep the seeds. I can still buy this variety from the garden centre, but unfortunately it's not labelled, so I don't know exactly what type of chili it actually is. So all I'm basically going to do is just nip off this young one here, take it out. I'm not going to keep this, quite a weak plant, so the genetics probably aren't that great in it, so I'm just going to discard that one. But I'm going to keep this here. So I'm just going to pop it in the pot roughly about that height. So this is quite a large increase in pot size, so I have to be careful not to overwater it, because until the roots fully extend into the whole pot, what can happen is the compost at the bottom can stay really wet until the roots get down to it, and if you have wet compost for a long time, it can cause problems with rotting and it can damage the roots. So I'll be careful with the watering to begin with, but generally this should be the last pot that it goes into for the rest of the season. Hopefully I will be able to keep this for several years. The mother that this came from, that plant was about 3 years old when it died, so I know it has good genetics for surviving year after year. But this is about the pot size I need. These are all dwarf chilies. The only one that I might upgrade to a larger pot in the future is the Piri Piri plant. All the other ones are dwarfs, so they won't be needing any large pots, as I'm not expecting them to grow very big. And with chilies, you don't want to bury the stem too much, unlike a tomato plant. But if you do bury the stem up to the seed leaves here, it will actually send out some new roots. But generally I wouldn't recommend burying it too much. But if you do, it's not the end of the world. They will put out some little side roots. And I'll just give you an example now on one of the plants where that's happened in the past. So this here is the Piri Piri plant, and you can see these little lumps on the side. That's roots that were trying to grow in the past. And further down there were actually some roots that grew out. And that's why there's a bit of flaring on the bottom there, because they did actually grow out some extra roots. But I've had that even more in plants in the past. But as I say, if you plant below, as long as you don't bury above the seed leaves, it will self-root. The stems can rot off a little bit easier than a tomato plant. They don't like it as much as tomato plants, but it's not a big issue. So if you're planting a pepper, there's no problem planting it slightly deeper than it was originally in the pot, as long as you don't bury it as really deep like you would with a tomato plant. So with these other plants that have 2 healthy plants in each pot, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to remove one of them and keep the other one in the small pot, and then just give the small chili plants to a friend of mine, because I don't really want to kill them off, because it's a shame, they're such nice plants. But at the same time, if I have too many plants, I don't have the space for them, I can't give them the adequate light and attention that they need, and they won't do as well. So I'm just going to keep the largest plant, just going to peel them off like that, put the largest plant in the big pot. I'm just going to keep this small one in its original pot. So for my Piri Piri plant here, what I'll be doing is taking off a lot of the old compost and putting in some new compost to freshen it up. As I say, this has been in here for quite some time. It's been over a year, I reckon. Well, just about a year, so it'll need some fresh compost. So I'm just going to try and tease it out of its pot. It doesn't feel particularly secure, so I don't think the roots have established too well. So unfortunately, most of the roots are at the bottom, so this will stress the plant out quite a lot. But I want to remove as much compost as I can. I'm going to try and find a happy medium between taking away as much compost as possible, but at the same time retaining a lot of the roots so the plant's not too stressed. So I'm going to peel away a lot of this top layer, because this feels really dry and I don't think there's many roots in here. I will unfortunately have to remove some of the roots from the bottom, but there's not much I can do about that. So I'm just breaking apart the compost and just loosening it off. So that's got good back to a good core of roots there, so I can keep that section. So this will stress the plant out quite a bit, but the new compost will have a lot better structure because it hasn't been breaking down over the last year like the old compost. And also there's quite a lot more nutrients and feed in the new compost as well. So the plant will be a lot stronger for this in the long run. So we'll be quite stressed because I've removed a lot of the roots, and the roots that were existing on this root ball here, they've also been stressed by being moved around and such. So it will be quite stressed and it will stunt the growth quite a bit. But once the new roots established and go into the richer compost, it will be much healthier, much stronger plant, and it will really start to take off again. So that's all the chilies now planted up. So I'll be giving them a good soak because the compost was quite dry when I was planting them. As I say, I'll be quite careful with the watering after I've given them the initial soaking because I don't want the compost to get too saturated. The roots haven't expanded fully into the pot yet, so there's a real risk of rotting off if I overwater them. But that's it for this update. I'm expecting some quite good growth from these. I'm going to see what windowsills I have available for them. They have been in the growth chamber for most of the times. They've been doing really well because they've had perfect light conditions, been kept at a relatively constant 22 to 27 degrees. So they've been putting on some good growth. But now I'm going to have to find space for them elsewhere. They're not going to get the perfect growing conditions, so the growth might mediate somewhat, but we'll see how they do. Generally though, the growth should accelerate because the space for the roots is much larger now, so they should do a lot better. Also, I can ask if it's sunny weather, and with it now being May and June, July coming up as well, it should be warm and sunny enough on my windowsills that I can get some really good, quite strong growth, because I've got some nice south-facing windowsills, as long as I can find enough space for these plants. So these two will be going away, I won't be keeping them, but these four at the back will be the ones I keep. So 4 different varieties. I've got my Caneto here, the Apache Chili, the unusual one that I wasn't too sure what it was, that I grew from seed, and also the Piri Piri from last year. So it's looking quite good this year so far. The main issue I'm worried about is the return of the thrips. They should be kept at bay though, because I've got the microscopic mites which should keep them at bay. The only issue that I might see coming up is aphids. It's May now. May's about the time when the aphids start becoming a problem. Unfortunately, the aphids, they start flying around May, June time, and they land on your clothing and then come inside with you, and then they just find a plant and devastate it. And that's what happened last year. So hopefully I can keep these aphid free. If they're in my grow box, that wouldn't be a big issue because it's quite well sealed. The aphids have a hard time trying to get into there. Whereas on the windowsill, it's a lot easier for the aphids to find these plants. So I'll see how they do. Hopefully the aphids don't come back. If they do, I'll be doing my utmost to keep them at bay. As I say, last year I was quite busy with work, and with the sheer number of plants it was hard to keep on top of them enough. I would give them treatments to wash off the aphids or pick them off, but there'd always be 1 or 2 left and they'd come back too quickly. But normally, if I do have enough time, I'm able to keep the aphid populations low enough that they don't really cause much of an issue. So that's all for this update. I'll probably give you another update in about a month or two's time. I'm expecting some good growth, hopefully some first chilies starting to form as well, because we've already got open flowers here, 3 open flowers on the unknown plant. We have an open flower on the Caneto, some good bud development on the Apache here, and some very small buds just starting to appear on the Piri Piri. So at least on the unknown chili there should be some good peppers starting to form. The other ones, I would think they would be just starting. The Piri Piri will be quite far off, I would think. I don't think we'll have any red chilies in a month or two, but we should certainly have some good sized green ones. So I'll give you guys an update then, and as I say, it should be about 2 months' time.